I'll call this meeting for November 8th, 2021 of the Canby Planning Commission to order. And we all ready to go there with Channel 5? I guess so. So we'll start with our invocation. Bless this meeting and all the participants that we have this evening. Help us to make wise and good decisions for the betterment of the city of Canby and for the citizens of Canby. In your name, amen. The pledge. We ready for the pledge? Usually a flag comes up.
We don't have one tonight.
Oh, darn. Okay. We'll do it anyway. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Consent, number 2 on our agenda is the consent items. Let's see, Planning Commission, we'll start with the Planning Commission minutes for June 28th.
I make a motion that we approve the Planning Commission minutes of June 28th, 2021.
Okay.
I had a quick question about that. I only saw the minutes for August 23rd. In the packet, the minutes was for the August 23rd meeting. Is that just the continuation from the June meeting?
My packet did not have the August 23rd minutes.
Well, it says it on the top, Commissioner Savory. So let me just do one check real quick here. I'm just going to make sure. I'm just going to go back a couple months here. Just give me 1 sec. Okay, so that is, I think they are, I think that is correct, Brianna. I think that's correct. I mean, I think it was in August when it went back to the Planning Commission. It was the remand piece. So I think that actually might be correct.
All right. Yeah, because the minutes that I read, yeah, it says August 23rd.
On the header, James, you're right, it does. And so I think that was when it finally came back to you guys from the council. They remanded it back, and then you took action. Right. The Planning Commission took action.
Yeah, those were the correct minutes. I don't know if the date was right, if that's the one you're talking. If you want the one where we turned down the original changing the zoning, those were the minutes for that last meeting for that.
I'm looking at that now.
Yeah.
All right.
So whatever the date is on those are the ones that I wanted to approve.
All right.
Okay, so is it the minutes for the August 23rd meeting then that we're approving?
Yes, that's, yeah.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Yes, I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. All righty then. Then we have the Colima Construction Office Building Final Findings, DR 21-08. That's on my agenda. That is on my agenda. Is that correct, Don?
Yes, that is on your agenda for Colima Construction and the final findings. Yes.
Okay, so we have to have a motion to approve that.
Yes.
I motion.
Yeah.
Okay, I motion to approve the Colima Construction Office Building Final Findings City File DR 21-08.
Can I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Citizen input on non-agenda items. Lainey, do we have anybody that is wanting to speak on non-agenda?
I don't believe so, Chair.
Okay. Dawn, do we have any new business?
No, nothing under number 5, Chair Seabury.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to have a public hearing for the Okada America site and design review lot line adjustment application for a property located at 368 and 372 South Sequoia Parkway. But the applicant, Okada America, has requested the hearing be delayed until a date certain of Monday, November 22nd.
That is correct. And just to add to that, they wanted some additional time to address some traffic analysis issues.
Okay, so we will not be having a public hearing at all this evening.
No, we will be going into continuation of discussions on food carts, and I have a few other items for you folks as well.
Okay, why don't we just start with the work session with the city council. So the zoning item A, is that what you had?
I was just gonna take a few minutes to go through A and B, and then I have one add to that, and then we'll jump into the food carts if that's okay.
That's a perfect segue.
Perfect. Okay, so November 17th, there'll be a joint work session, just kind of giving you a heads up on that zoning framework. You're going to see a list of near-term and long-term potential changes in the zoning code, which we are suggesting, and then also kind of the context for the long-term. Some of the long-term code changes are going to require us to evaluate the zoning in light of housing needs analysis and housing production strategy work that we have received grants for both those from DLCD, and that work's going to starting in December and run through the end of the year. And then there's also an economic opportunity analysis, which we're hoping will also start and run that same time frame, starting in December, running through the end of next year. So some of the long-term issues dealing with housing and things like the type of residential zoning that we have, zoning standards for residential, those really should be looked at after we get through the housing needs analysis piece. Similarly, for employment lands, economic opportunity analysis, I think also should run first before we start making any adjustments to industrial zoning. So more to come on that, but just to let you know, November 17th at 6 p.m., another joint work session. Also, DKS will be there. The bulk of that, my hope is that the bulk of that will be on DKS. We have other opportunities to talk about the zoning, but they kind of got combined together. They are integrated in some ways, but DKS will be speaking to a number of issues. One is the transportation system plan, how they go about doing traffic studies in more detail. I think it'll be a really good educational piece for all of us they'll cover that. And so they're going to be the part right after my introduction on the zoning framework. Then November 22nd, hopefully we'll have Okada. That's what the plan is at this point for that hearing. That's the only item on the 22nd we have so far. Before I jump into food carts, just to recognize the request for planning commissioners to have their own email addresses. We have found a way to make that happen. I will need you to return your iPads to me temporarily. And then what we'll do is we'll have our IT person load that up so you can use your iPads with your email accounts that we'll set up for the city. So I don't have an exact timeline, but as convenient, if you guys can come in, we'll get those done one by one. And so you guys will all have individual city accounts for emails. And then finally, we're going to talk about food carts, and this is a continuation of the discussion. I know that was somewhat of a short session the last time, and there was a lot of commentary. I didn't hear a lot of commentary from the planning commission. Part of it is I think council spoke quite a bit. And so I feel like you guys deserve a shot here as well to talk more. Brianna is prepared to go through and kind of put that in context. And some of that is related to standards that we're trying to develop, and we want your input on that before we go back to you with an ordinance, a draft ordinance, which would be the next step. Takeaways from that last meeting, council was hoping that we could get back in front of you in about 60 days, plus or minus, with a draft ordinance. And I think that's doable. That'd be the beginning of next year. And so that's something we'll be working on, but we definitely want your input. You'll be the first review. You'll be the first reviewers of this. And so it's important for us as well that we hear what you guys have to say. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brianna.
Thank you, Don.
Good evening, planning commissioners. As you can see here, I have a presentation outline slide. I do have the entire presentation from our work session. So, I'd be more than happy to run through it all again, or if you were taking notes, I'd be happy, we can start however you'd like. I would really like to hear from you all.
I have a question.
Okay.
You had brought up an ordinance that you had seen somewhere that referred to any sort of shelter as a requirement for a frame of some sort on the structure, as opposed to, I'm really kind of opposed to tents. I think tents by their nature are temporary, and if they're not maintained well, then they become hazards quickly. And I was wondering if you had any details on that.
On the specific regulation?
I just remember, I know that you mentioned that there was a regulation that you had heard about, and I didn't know if you had any more details about it or had just thought about it in our special case on its own.
Well, that idea was actually brought up first by the picture. So I found that example, and we can jump right to it, of this where it is fully enclosed. And I wanted to bring this specifically because we've heard that, kind of the typical pop-up tents, we don't want to see those. So I feel like this is a different product. So what we can do, I don't have a reference ordinance. I haven't seen this specifically in other codes, but what we can do is, define what this product is, and then insert it into the code as a design strategy. So that is definitely one thing I would like everyone's opinion on. I know we don't like tents. Absolutely, I understand that. But I feel like there needs to be some sort of middle between a tent and a building. And I would love to, hear more from you about that.
I think one of the counselors was making a point of trying to not be too prescriptive as to materials, but we could be more broadly state the purpose of, or the broad parameters of what we want out of a structure like that. And I don't think we need to define like a wind speed that it needs to be able to withstand, but I think that we could comfortably say it should be wood framed or metal framed of an appropriate strength to deal with, moderate to high winds, and of appropriate cosmetic standards of the surrounding area, say. I don't think it needs to be anything fancy if you're just covering up some seating area in an industrial area. We'd probably want something nicer downtown, and it would be nice if we had flexibility on that, as well as whoever built it had what kind of flexibility on materials. I just want to avoid any opportunity for temporary structures to be just end up permanent by default.
Wonderful. Those are really great insights. Thank you.
Can I make one point about food carts? Because when I kind of think of a food cart, I think of something as mobile. Right? Kind of don't know how you could make a regulation where it has to have a structure like that. And then, because then they wouldn't be able to move.
Yeah. So this is kind of this new hybrid site development strategy that we've seen where the property owner is actually developing the structural elements, and these individual carts come in as tenants for that property owner. And so, the individual carts can come and go as their leases are up, as their business succeeds, or what have you. So it's actually the property owner that is taking the lead on installing all of these, the design strategies that we're regulating here.
Okay, so then they could come and go on a daily basis? Or
No. This would be a leasing situation with the property owner. It would be, at least 6 months, I'm assuming. It's a typical renter's lease.
Okay, well, are we going to allow mobile food carts in town where they don't lease a spot to leave their cart?
Yes, and so that was the hybrid.
Somebody that might go service Columbia in the morning, go to produce place in the afternoon, or the furniture place.
Mm-hmm. So we do have a regulation in our code that says if they are that mobile, if they're moving, 2 times a day, they actually don't need permitting from us in terms of land use, because they're not even a permanent enough land use to really consider the impacts. So, if it's that situation where they're literally moving several times a day, that's not really in our scope. But what we are also looking at, in addition to pods, separately, are the regulations for single carts, which we're calling mobile food vendors. So the single carts are the type 1 application that was attached to the work session packet that we kind of just worked off of the temporary use application. And we just tailored the standards to these individual carts. So we are hoping, Hensley kind of asked, how many food carts will we get? And that's a really difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I think we're going to have like a pretty clear set of expectations between like the pods that are renting out spaces versus the individual food carts. Because I think a landowner in one of those pods, like that shelter that you had on the screen a minute ago, that should be no problem for them to, put up something of that quality. Whereas like, somebody parking out in front of, out in the industrial park, they can be more temporary. So right. I had a couple questions, because I know that, like I've seen, the tents that they sell at like Costco, or the pop-up tents that we don't want to see, but then that the structure that you showed was like semi-permanent. And it had like the hard corrugated either plastic or the sheet metal, and those are built to last. A lot of people use them for RVs for decades, and they stand up fine. But it was something that I was thinking about before is my biggest concern with a lot of these the food carts is, I mentioned it during the joint session, was that a lot of the time you get the scent, you get the smell, the runoff wastewater, whatnot. Would it be reasonable to say those pods would have to be connected to city wastewater, so it goes straight to the treatment? Where it's like absolutely. Some of the ones that are less permanent, I've seen them with like external tanks before. I'd like some sort of way to disguise those and watch out for the aesthetics of it, so it doesn't turn into a big tank, a bunch of hoses, and looking like a mess. So it's I guess I've seen a lot of these pods in different places, and some are nice, some I don't want my kids touching anything. So it's I'd like to copy more what they're doing in like Beaverton or at the asylum in Portland versus over by the federal courthouse.
Great. Perfect. Yeah, and I am following up with Jamie and Daryl Hughes at Wastewater to get more information from them. They're actually really excited about this as well. So.
Yeah.
So
John?
go ahead. Lynn. I was concerned, other than the sanitation issue, that excuse me. Other than the sanitation issue that Commissioner Heed just touched on, I'm concerned about, where these are actually going to be located. It's never really been stated it's going to be in this location or that location. And I'm just more than curious as to where we're planning on plunking these down.
So we aren't planning on developing a pod ourselves. We are working on integrating the regulations so that a private property owner can do it. If you're asking about sort of the zoning and locations where we want to see them, that's kind of this zoning districts chart here. We want to see them in the larger format commercial zones with just kind of our standard regulations. And then we wanted to talk about specific regulations for the small format, commercial residential, and then the industrial areas as well. So does that answer your question, or were you?
Well, no, that it kind of does, but
okay.
What it boils down to then is, are the property owner or the developer have to come back to the planning commission with a site plan? Will we see these come before us down the road? Somebody will come and say, well, I have, a half a city block and I want to put food carts on there. Will that come before us?
So here, nothing's set in stone, right? But here we have it all as a type 2. If they can meet all of the standards that we set, which means it would not come before you unless it was appealed. This is the best way to get a pod, in my opinion, is to make it clear. When we get into type 3s and we present to the planning commission here, we kind of get into discretion. And property owners who want to develop a pod, they are very risk averse. They don't want to spend a lot of money fully developing their site. So if we can make standards that are clear enough that we as staff, and Don as the director, would be able to administer ourselves and, get those permits out. I talked about the length of these permit processes. So again, if they can meet all the standards, we are proposing a type 2. We didn't really get into if they can't meet all the standards, but we want to bring it to PC. A conditional use may be appropriate. And then that could be a type 3 that would come to you.
Okay.
Commissioner Savory and Brianna, just maybe as we develop this ordinance, just a thought that came to me is when we go before you, when we have the draft code, I think it might be helpful to have like graphics or pictures of what we're actually identifying as part of what these code sections are saying. I think that would be helpful because I think the challenge here is, you're right, they could go in a lot of different places. In the work session that we had before, Jamie brought up somebody was interested who had excess property on 99E. And that would be a place where they likely could happen. But in terms of like what the standards are, and perhaps showing some examples of what that would look like, I think with that in mind, we would follow that. And I do agree with Brianna. I think the lift, if we do a type 3, I think we're going to really discourage food carts in the city. I think that's a pretty big lift in most jurisdictions. I'd say probably, Brianna, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if any of them require type 3 that you've looked at.
Not if they can meet all the standards.
Yeah.
This is Jason. I have a couple things real quick. First, I want to apologize for not being at the work session. I was having dinner with some friends that I hadn't seen in a while, and it was my birthday, so I decided, whatever, I was checking out. But that being said, with these permits and these codes that we're kind of putting together for this, I assume that you are not creating these things from scratch. You are pulling this information from other cities that have similar codes, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
I should have given you this presentation. Yes. So
I did watch some of it,
Okay.
but what I would say is when we do this code review, like when this comes to us to say, look, this is what we are recommending, would it be possible to take those larger sort of pieces of the code that you are creating and call out to say, we took this piece of code from these municipalities. So that way we can say, okay, this is what we are planning to do. I've been to Beaverton or Oregon City or Tigard or wherever, and I've seen how this looks like there, and it kind of gives us an opportunity to visualize what that would actually look like in real life. Does that make sense?
Sure. Great idea. Yeah.
And I know you will be adapting it for our scenario, but I'm assuming that a chunk of where like the skeleton is actually coming from these other codes. So if it's like, this is what we're saying they need to do, and this directly relates to what is done in Beaverton, Tigard, and Oregon City, so that we can kind of put a visual to what that looks like in real life.
Definitely.
I personally am fine with it being as a type 2. I understand that these people can be quite skittish. And so, a type 1 and type 2 seems to be reasonable to me.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Jason. That's I think that they will be they'll be flexible as long as it's profitable.
And as far as like tying them into sewer and public utilities, again, and I forgive me if this is rehashing something, for them to do that, would that work under the type 2, or would that force them to then bump that up to an R3?
No.
Or a type 3 request?
No, it can be a type 2.
Okay. And I'm assuming that if it was part of that type 2, that like Public Works would be involved in that, so that they can say, again, it comes down to like grease traps and what's actually going into the system, so that they have some say in how that's going to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in type 2s, we write a staff report just as you would see with the conditions of approval from different departments. So, the product will be the same. It's just not you making the ultimate decision with discretion. It's us specifically looking at the standards. So definitely Public Works would be involved from the beginning.
Yeah, and I would say, Canby Utility, obviously for utilities, and then also Canby Fire, and we know that they will have code. We understand that there's some development of some food cart standards from Canby Fire. Those have not been materially created yet, but we'll want to make sure that they're looking at these as well, so that they're comfortable with the standards.
So do we have who is going to be responsible at the city? Who's going to be responsible for kind of, I won't say policing is not the right word, but checking on things periodically to see that, licenses are up to date, all of that sort of thing.
Right. So each individual cart will need a business license. So, we will have that screener every year for them, as well as the pod owner. He also has to have a business license for kind of the mutual upkeep of the area and things that you were voicing some concerns about, kind of the overall, safety structure, habitability of the pod. So they'll all have business licenses. Beyond that, this is would be regulated by kind of the civil side of the police department, our code enforcement officer. Her name is Carrie. And we work really closely with her on, code violations of all sorts. So this would, be on her radar as well. And then, of course, if anything bad was happening, we have the police. So.
Okay.
Code enforcement is generally complaint driven. So I would imagine that if anyone had a problem with anything they saw, she would be the person to deal with it. But generally probably aren't going to be any more proactive about enforcing rules there than they would be for any other restaurant, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's true.
I
Go
just
ahead.
thought about whenever we were talking about the permitting during the last session, if I remember correctly, it was the pod owner would handle the initial permitting, right? And then the leasers for the spot itself, they wouldn't have to go through the whole permitting process, if I
That's
remember
correct.
correctly. Or,
Yeah, they would just need to get a business license.
yeah. All right. Yeah. So it's so whoever the property owner is, they're not necessarily going to be in the food cart business. They're going to be in the leasing a space business. So it'll be
That is correct. Typically the owners are pretty involved. The developers of the BG Food Cartel, it's literally named for them. They're the BGs, and the family works there. These developers, they aren't sort of the out-of-state big investors coming in to densify and build. They're people who own pieces of property, who kind of want to provide this community. So the vast majority I've seen the developers and being the property owners being involved.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, but that should so I guess where I was going with that is basically we'd be having to hold the pod owner more accountable for the permitting and a lot of the regulations, and then so it'll make it easier on the tenants just to have a business license there.
That's correct. And a lease with the property owner. So they would have limited responsibilities, their own individual trash cans and things like that. But
yeah, so then whenever we start to create some regulations for the people parking out in front of out at the industrial park, the permits for those are going to be if I remember correctly, it was a year-long permit, right? So they'd only have to renew once a year, but and that makes it so that they can stay parked there and don't have to move for a year, right? So
that is what we were proposing. It is still, nothing set in stone. I remember early on someone mentioned starting kind of a 6-month window just to see that they could remain in good standing and then start doing the year. It might be a little more difficult to track, just logistically, but I think a year it provides enough security for them that if they're doing well, they know they can stay. But if they're not doing well, they probably won't stay the year regardless. So
we've heard some interest at Commissioner Heed on some of the industrial park areas where they would like to serve their employees kind of on a regular basis. And the 6 month, I think it's like Brianna saying, just not long enough. And I think we could, the year still tests it. I'm guessing that we would be, for employees to be interested, I'm assuming they would also want some of the same things, that it looks appropriate and like you'd actually want to eat there. So I do think that's a little self-regulating to some degree. I don't think many of the areas in the industrial areas are, people are, they're going to want good food. And I think that's really, with that, I think largely comes people that want to do it right. And then I guess the other piece of this is that I've seen, and we've discussed this, I've seen actually businesses go to brick and mortar that started out as food carts, and they're quite successful. There's an Italian restaurant I know of that did that. And So there's that piece too. So I think these people are looking to aspire to perhaps something even bigger, which I think would help us as a city as well.
Well, and actually, if I could build upon that thought, Don, one of the things that was brought up with the Canby Beer Library is they are planning to put in those micro kitchens, and those micro kitchens serve as part of an evolutionary process for these sort of businesses. So they can start out as a food cart, and then if the food cart is doing really well here in the city, then if one of these micro kitchens are open, that provides them an actual, brick and mortar permanent kitchen where they can create their food and serve it, but they don't have to worry about the overhead of an entire restaurant. And then if that works out, then they would be able to, actually open up a full service restaurant in the city. So I think the food carts coupled with that model, I think it kind of will lend itself into this, this breeding ground for successful eateries here in the city is what I would like to see.
All right. Yeah. All right. So I that all sets well. I'm just trying to look forward into the future, I guess, in my mind. And so if we have a food cart and they're out there hosing off all their cooking stuff, going down to the storm drain in the middle of the parking lot, do we hold the food cart owner responsible or the landowner at that point if it's not a part of a pod?
If it's an individual cart, we would hold the food cart owner responsible. We would probably suspend their business license. We would, especially if they didn't comply, we would obviously then extend it to the property owner or to the, the long-term leaser of an industrial parcel or something like that. But, hopefully we don't see a lot of that because we're building the standards, but we would just contact them directly.
I was going to bring up one more thing, which we didn't really touch on. I think the county health department obviously is a player here too. When you're dealing with food, you have to have a handler's license. And I think those, I don't know what the inspections are, but I'm assuming those are at least yearly as well, just like a regular restaurant would have. So that's another layer altogether that these folks would need to have.
That's true. And I believe that there's a special class of handler's license for mobile units and pods. I don't read building code all the time, but it sounded pretty comprehensive and that they were looking specifically at this model too.
Are you guys looking at any alcohol service rules at this point, or is that maybe at some point in the future?
I don't think we as land use planners can really regulate that. Don, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's going to fall largely to the state on that in terms of getting licenses. I mean, it seems like it is largely controlled. In a typical restaurant scenario, we just approve the restaurant. Now, what they do inside of it is on serving alcohol and how it's served and, the limitations of that. I do feel like it really is up to the state more than, because our code actually doesn't define that. If you have a restaurant, you can have alcohol, and some people may have a restaurant that don't have alcohol. That word's not even in the code, I don't think. So it's not really regulated.
Well, liquor licenses and stuff are approved by city council. So, there's a different permitting process for liquor licenses. Like if, I don't know whether if a brick and mortar food cart or restaurant that has a portable food cart has a liquor license at their brick and mortar location. From what I understand, that is not transferable. If a food cart wanted to serve alcohol, they would have to apply for a liquor license. And that would have to run through city council.
Well, and one of the things about it is that they would serve you up a beer, and all of a sudden there you are standing on the street with a beer, as opposed to being inside of an establishment. And so I think to a degree that we could address it with design standards so that at least it's a space that it's possible to monitor alcohol coming and going from the place.
Mhm.
But you know, if it's really something that's outside our zone and it's something that lands more squarely with city council and the county and the state, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't neglecting it.
Well, I think that, for example, the backstop will serve you alcohol to go, whereas the hair will not. But it has to be almost in a sealed container as it leaves the restaurant. But what happens after that, of course, they have no control over. But so I know that that under current laws, because of the pandemic, that we're serving, a lot of places are serving alcohol to go.
Yeah, even individual cocktails, I've heard.
Yeah, they have to, I know, because now I don't drink, but I do order for someone that does. And you have to order, they will not sell you an individual alcoholic beverage unless you order food to go with it.
Well, and this might be something where, you know, as you look at other cities, if it's, you know, obviously I don't think it would make sense for the tier 1 individual carts,
Right.
but for a pod, you know, if a landowner is a you know, looking to start a pod and there are 3 to 5, you know, carts on there and they want to have a beer garden, I think that might be something that needs to be looked at might have to come from a city council standpoint or the Oregon Liquor Board. But I mean, I can see where you're going with it, Michael, and I think that would be something good to kind of look into how, because I know there's the big food cart in Beaverton. I think it's in Beaverton, right off of TV Highway there. You can get alcohol at least part of it and have it in that sort of fenced in area. So that might be something to kind of just look at to see how others do it and how that would integrate.
There's a food cart pod at Skidmore that does it really well. But
Okay.
there's actually a brick and mortar pub on the corner, but there's also a cart inside that serves mixed drinks. But it's, you know, it's a very enclosed place, and I would imagine that just may be something that's comes up as a site by site review, or maybe not at all. I'm not sure, but that place does it really well, I thought.
So are there any more comments, questions, or observations from any of the counselors? Larry, we'll start with you. Commissioner Boatwright, are you with me?
Larry,
Yep, I'm
you're
back.
muted. There you go.
Okay, Larry.
No, I have, the only question I had, it never really got answered, I don't think, was are mobile carts that go from business to business going to be allowed? Not
They
the
are
ones
current-
on the pod.
Yes.
They will be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I had another,
But they're already allowed, aren't they? I mean, you see them all over. They're affectionately called roach coaches, but you know, I don't
Right.
know. I don't know how those are regulated.
So if they are there less than a full day, you know, if they are moving multiple times a day, we as land use, you know, regulators, we can't really keep up with that. So that does happen, and that's kind of out of our scope. But we are here trying to regulate the ones that want to stay for a longer period of time.
Okay.
okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Jason, did you have any more questions or concerns?
Well, real quickly, just to touch on what Larry was saying. Technically, if they really wanted to follow the rules, and come in for a day or whatever, they would go through the tier 1, correct?
So we have a provision in our temporary use section, and I don't know the exact number of hours, but I believe it's 2 or 3, where if you're under that hourly threshold, then we don't review it at all.
Okay.
We would hope that they have a business license as, an operator of a business. But there is that kind of provision for just very short periods.
Okay. I guess for me, one thing I have a question about is, we've talked about, and I don't know, this probably doesn't fall under this food carts, but we've talked about not really wanting tents, and there are some restaurants in town that have the tents that look horrible. Is there a way to look at those as part of this, like as a different section or something? Because that seems like a rabbit hole that may need to be addressed as we go further on.
Yeah, I think not specifically with food carts, but because we are looking at, the low hanging fruit ordinances that Don's going to be talking about on the 17th. Definitely not the first time we've heard about these tents. And again, in the height of COVID, we were a little flexible, but as they especially get rained on and everything, we are wanting to look at that again. So, Don, do you think that is up for discussion?
I think it's something that is a hot topic right now, and I think it should be probably added. Commissioner Patton, I'm not sure how that works. I mean, I think it needs to be addressed. I would agree with you. I don't know if it really falls within the food cart provisions, but that's something that I've heard actually before as well, that there was concerns around how those look. And there was that idea of kind of combining. I'm just worried that we're going to somehow derail the food cart thing by like going that direction. And so I think it does need to have attention, but it may be a separate piece of code that needs to be written for that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's just something we were talking about tents and it popped into my head and I just wanted to make sure to throw it out there before it's lost. As far as any more questions, I think we're on the right track with this. I think it's a great step it's a step in the right direction for where we're going. I mean, I was having this conversation the other day with some friends that were in town, and we kind of talked about how the downtown core is really starting to kind of pick up speed with some eateries and some different types of shops and stuff. And I think the population of Canby and the mix of the folks living here have finally hit that has started to hit that sweet spot where people are more willing to stay and play in Canby rather than sleep and go. And I think that this is just going to help that out. And I will reiterate this for restaurants that say, we really, or folks that say, this is dangerous for, it's going to create unwanted competition. I completely disagree. I think that these food carts, if someone doesn't, we can only eat at the Wild Hare or whatever other restaurant in town so many times. And so the more options you have for people to mix it up, the better it's going to be for all those eateries as a whole. So I am all for full steam ahead on making this happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Patton. Before we started discussing this, I did go around to several of the established brick and mortar restaurants, the Hare being one, Backstop, and the Wayward Sandwich place way down the road, and they all seemed very optimistic. They were encouraging that this was going to be a good thing for Canby and for competition. My concern when this first came up a few years back was exactly that. I thought it was kind of an unfair competition for those businesses that had spent a lot of money on upgrading their brick and mortar facilities. They were tightly regulated, that sort of thing. So the thing that swung me in favor of food carts was the fact that our established brick and mortar restaurants and eateries seem to have no problem with it whatsoever. So that's kind of my thinking on it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Commissioner Heeb, do you have any more thoughts?
Yeah, I guess one more thing. I know we briefly talked about it last during the work session but like noise from generators. And so I know the generators probably wouldn't be allowed in the pods, just because they are probably going to have like the utilities on site and wastewater, but the individual ones, I guess something just to muffle generators so it's not, I don't know, obscenely loud or anything, and then even like a doghouse or something like that just to disguise it, along with those like wastewater tanks. But I don't know.
No, there are definitely more effective screening strategies that have an effect on noise. You would think landscaping has a bigger effect on noise than just, say, a fence. So those are definitely things we can think about. We can also ask for, we have noise standards in Title IX of our code. So I always reference back to those. So we have standard thresholds for the zone. So, a requirement for pods can be, give us a spec sheet of your generator and it has to meet our standards. So those are things to think about, definitely.
All right. Yeah, I think that's all that I had for tonight.
Thank you. Commissioner Hutchinson, did you have any further observations or questions?
Just one question. I was wondering if the staff has started writing language yet, and how long they think it would take for them to come up with something that they would be comfortable putting before council.
Council or planning commission?
Well, would it go to us first or council?
It would go to you first. Yep.
Okay. Well,
yeah. So this
for us then, I would imagine.
Okay. So this would be a text amendment, which is a type 4. So you would recommend that council approve adopting it into the code. So we hope to have it. I have not started picking apart the code yet, but I definitely have started kind of outlining what I want it to look like. I think I have sort of the sections that we've discussed pretty well lined out. But we do want to have it before you within 60 days. That's what City Council said. And I'm thinking maybe early January, mid-January.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ring-a-ling-ding, yeah.
So maybe not the first. I believe it's the 10th is the first session back after the 27th, which I don't think we're going to hold, of December. So January 10th is the first after the holidays, and then perhaps maybe the one after that.
I would be more concerned that we get it right and we rush it to fruition. I'd like
no,
to
absolutely.
Well, crafted.
Yeah, at least just something you can look at. We can always bring it back one more time, make edits, and then bring it back to you.
Okay, that sounds great. Dawn, do you have any more things that you would like to share with us right now before we adjourn?
No, that was it for tonight. Thank you for the commentary. That's really helpful. I think it's really good to talk through these and get people's ideas on board. And I think it'll be really helpful as we start drafting this. So that was all we really had tonight.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Don. Excellent job, Brianna. I really appreciated all of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your comments.
And
really insightful stuff.
Thank you. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? No? Okay. Thank you very much for your participation. And we'll all be enjoying food carts for Valentine's Day. Or,
See,
I don't know.
there you guys.
Probably not, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. It sounded really good.
Aspirational. Absolutely. Right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.